Hands on the wall, now! You people always creeping around where you don't belong, like roaches.
The officer slammed the black man against the brick, hard. The man's groceries scattered across the sidewalk.
Officer, I live here. Let me...
Shut your mouth. I don't care where you think you live. A monkey in a suit is still a monkey. Turn around.
Two neighbors stood on their porches, watching a black man get shoved into a wall in broad daylight. Nobody said a word. The man pressed against that wall didn't yell. He just said quietly,
Be careful with the jacket, officer.
Hadley ripped it open anyway. A wallet tumbled out, hit the concrete, fell open under the streetlight. Something gold flashed. Hadley didn't see it. But what was inside that wallet was about to make this the worst night of his entire career. Let me take you back to the beginning. Before the wall, before the badge, before any of it. Wesley Turner was 38 years old, tall, athletic build, clean-shaven. The kind of man who walked into a room and stood straight, shoulders back, eyes forward, hands still. Not because he was trying to impress anyone, that's just how he carried himself. Like every step he took had a purpose. On this particular Tuesday evening, Wesley was doing something remarkably ordinary. He was walking home from a corner store 6 blocks from his house, a paper bag of groceries in one hand, a bottle of sparkling water poking out the top. He was wearing a fitted charcoal blazer over a plain black t-shirt. Nothing flashy, nothing unusual. Just a man walking home to make dinner. Wesley had moved to Briarfield Heights 3 months earlier. If you've never heard of Briarfield Heights, picture this. A quiet suburb just outside Richmond, Virginia. Manicured lawns, American flags on every other porch, little security company signs staked into front yards like they were part of the landscaping. The kind of neighborhood where people smiled at you if they recognized you, and stared at you if they didn't. And here's a detail that matters. In the 12 months before Wesley moved there, residents of Briarfield Heights had called 911 3 separate times to report suspicious individuals. All 3 times the person they reported was a black man. All 3 times the man either lived in the neighborhood or worked there. All 3 times, no charges were filed. Not one. That's the kind of place Wesley moved into. A place where being unfamiliar and being black meant the same thing to some people. Now, there's something about Wesley you need to understand. Something the outline won't tell you outright just yet. Wesley was the kind of person who noticed things other people missed. License plates, body language, the way someone shifted their weight right before they lied. When he walked into a room, the first thing he did, before he said hello, before he sat down, was map the exits. Every time. It wasn't paranoia. It was habit. A deep, trained, bone-level habit that had been drilled into him for over a decade. You might think, okay, maybe he's ex-military. Maybe he's just hyper-aware from living as a black man in America, which honestly trains you to notice everything whether you want to or not. Both of those are reasonable guesses. But neither one is the full answer. Not even close. Keep that in the back of your mind. It's going to matter. While Wesley walked home that evening, a woman named Tamara Hollins was watching him from behind her screen door. Tamara was 55, retired school teacher, lived on Magnolia Drive for over 20 years. She saw Wesley walking past her house. Tall black man, nice blazer, paper bag, walking slowly, and she picked up her phone. She didn't call to say hello. The 911 call was short. A woman reports, a tall black male possibly casing houses on Magnolia Drive. The dispatcher asks a standard question. Has the man done anything threatening? There's a pause. Then Tamara says, no, but he doesn't look like he lives here. That's it. That was the whole basis. He doesn't look like he lives here. Now let me introduce you to the other side of this story. Officer Derek Hadley, 32 years old, 5 years on the force, blonde buzz cut, mirrored sunglasses perched on his forehead even though the sun was already going down. The kind of guy who talked louder than everyone in the room and never seemed to notice or care. Hadley was mid-shift, riding in his patrol cruiser with his partner Craig Bowen, 29. Hadley was telling some story, laughing too hard at his own jokes, one hand off the steering wheel, filling the car with noise. Bowen was quieter. The kind of partner who laughed along but never added much. A follower. One detail, Hadley's body camera was on, but it was angled slightly off-center, tilted just enough that the frame didn't quite capture what was directly in front of him. Maybe it shifted during the drive. Maybe it didn't. Either way, remember that. It's going to come up later. The dispatch call crackled through the radio. Suspicious person, Magnolia Drive, tall black male. Hadley grinned. Let's go see what we got. His tone wasn't serious. It was eager, almost entertained. Bowen shifted in his seat but didn't say anything. And 2 blocks away, Wesley Turner adjusted his blazer. Specifically, he patted the inner left pocket. A small, quick, habitual gesture. Like checking for his keys. Except it wasn't keys. If you watched that moment on camera, you wouldn't think twice about it. Just a man adjusting his jacket. But if you watched it again, after hearing the rest of this story, you'd understand exactly what was in that pocket. And you'd realize Wesley Turner had been carrying the answer the whole time. The patrol car pulled up behind Wesley about halfway down Magnolia Drive. No sirens, just headlights flooding him from behind, stretching his shadow long across the pavement. Wesley stopped walking. He didn't turn around immediately. He took a breath first, slow, deliberate, then turned to face the lights. His hands were already visible, grocery bag in one hand, the other open at his side. This wasn't his first time being stopped. His body already knew the choreography. Stay still, stay visible, don't make sudden movements, don't give them a reason. Hadley stepped out of the cruiser. His hand rested on his belt, not on his weapon, not yet, but close enough to make a point. He left the door open. The radio hummed behind him. "Evening, you live around here?" It wasn't really a question, it was a challenge. The tone said, "I already know the answer and I don't believe whatever you're about to tell me." Wesley answered calmly. "Yes, officer, I live on Birch Lane, just walking home from the store." He lifted the grocery bag slightly, a reasonable gesture, a normal answer to a normal question. Hadley didn't acknowledge it, didn't nod, didn't say, "Okay." He just stared at Wesley for a beat too long, then said, "Let me see some ID." Wesley nodded. And then he did something very specific, something that at this point in the story seems like nothing more than a man being careful. He narrated his own movements out loud. "I'm going to reach into my inner left jacket pocket for my wallet. Slowly." He said it clearly, deliberately, like he'd said it before, like the words were rehearsed, not from fear, but from training. But right now, standing on a suburban street with a cop staring him down, it just looked like a black man protecting himself from being stopped during a routine stop. And honestly, both of those things were true at the same time. Wesley reached into his blazer, slowly. 2 fingers. He pulled out a leather wallet and handed over his driver's license. Hadley looked at the ID, looked at Wesley, looked at the ID again, then, "This says Birch Lane." "That's correct. You just moved here?" "About 3 months ago." Hadley tilted his head. 3 months and nobody on this street knows you? That's interesting. Wesley didn't respond to that. There was nothing to respond to. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed up as curiosity. Hadley turned to Bowen, who was still standing near the passenger side of the cruiser. "Run this." He handed over the license. Bowen took it back to the car without a word. And there stood Wesley Turner, alone, in the middle of the street, lit up by headlights like he was on a stage, a paper bag of groceries hanging from one hand. A car passed on the next block. The driver slowed down, looked, kept going. This is what humiliation looks like when it's not loud. It's not always a shout or a slur. Sometimes it's just standing in a spotlight you didn't ask for, while a stranger decides whether you deserve to exist in your own neighborhood. Wesley waited. Then he asked, politely, precisely, "Officer, am I being detained? Because if not, I'd like to continue walking home." It was a legal question, textbook, the kind of sentence that comes from knowing your rights inside and out. But Hadley didn't hear a legal question. He heard defiance. His posture changed, shoulders squared, jaw tightened. He stepped closer, close enough that Wesley could smell the coffee on his breath. "I'll tell you when you can go. We got a call about someone matching your description, so you're gonna stand right there until I say otherwise. You understand me?" Wesley's jaw tightened, but he didn't move, didn't argue, didn't escalate. Then, his phone buzzed, in his pocket. Just a vibration. Wesley's eyes dropped for half a second, instinct, nothing more, and that was enough. Hadley's hand snapped to his holster. "Don't move!" Wesley froze. His hands went up immediately, open palms. "It's my phone, officer, just my phone." Hadley kept his hand on the holster for 3 full seconds before pulling it away. 3 seconds? That doesn't sound like a lot, but when a man with a gun is staring at you because your phone buzzed in your pocket, 3 seconds is a lifetime. Bowen came back from the cruiser. His voice was flat, almost bored. "He's clean. No warrants, no record. Address checks out." This should have been the end. ID confirmed. Record clean. Address matches. There was nothing, literally nothing, left to investigate. The call was a description match. The description matched. The man was who he said he was. It was over. Except it wasn't. Hadley paused. A long pause. The kind of pause where you can see a man choosing to ignore the facts in front of him. Then he said something that might be the most revealing line in this entire story. "All right, but something's off about you. Why are you so calm?" Let that sit for a second. Wesley Turner had done everything right. He complied. He identified himself. He narrated his own movements so he wouldn't get shot reaching for his wallet. His record was clean. His address was confirmed. And the officer's response to all of that, to a man being perfectly, completely cooperative, was suspicion. Because he was too calm. Wesley almost smiled. A flicker, barely there, then gone. "I'm calm because I haven't done anything wrong, officer." Hadley didn't like that answer. You could see it in the way his neck stiffened, in the way his hand drifted back toward his belt. A man like Hadley doesn't want calm. He wants fear. He wants submission. And when he doesn't get it, he manufactures a reason to demand it. "Turn around, hands on the wall." Wesley's voice stayed level. "My record is clean. My ID checks out. The call was a description match, and I match the description. I understand that. But there's no basis for a search, officer." "I said turn around. I'm not going to ask again." Wesley held the officer's eyes for one more second. Then he turned, slowly. He placed his hands flat against the brick wall of a building on the corner of Magnolia and Birch. His grocery bag sat on the sidewalk between his feet. Hadley moved in. The pat-down was rough from the first second, not procedural, not by the book. Aggressive. He yanked at Wesley's blazer, pulled at the pockets, squeezed the fabric like he was looking for something he already decided was there. Wesley said, firmly but without raising his voice, "Be careful with the jacket." That set Hadley off. He heard it as an order from a suspect on his street during his stop. And Derek Hadley did not take orders from people he'd already decided were beneath him. "You don't tell me what to do." He shoved Wesley harder against the wall. Wesley's cheek hit brick. His grocery bag toppled. The sparkling water bottle hit the concrete and shattered. Water and glass sprayed across the sidewalk. And during that shove, during that aggressive, unnecessary, violent motion, Hadley ripped the blazer open. The wallet, the same wallet from the very beginning of this story, tumbled from the inner pocket. It hit the ground, skidded 2 feet, and fell open. Something gold caught the streetlight, something blue. Hadley didn't see it. He was too busy pulling Wesley's arms behind his back, reaching for his handcuffs, too focused on control to notice that control was about to be ripped away from him permanently. But across the street, a man named Earl Jennings had stepped onto his porch. 62 years old, lived on Magnolia Drive for 31 years. He'd seen officers stop black men on this street 3 times in the past 14 months. This time he pulled out his phone, and he pressed record. The cuffs clicked shut around Wesley's wrists. And here's the part that will stay with you. Wesley didn't resist, didn't shout. His face was pressed against that wall, hands locked behind his back, groceries destroyed at his feet. And his eyes were open, calm, steady, scanning, like he was taking notes inside his own mind. He had a choice in that moment. He could have said something. He could have spoken 4 words that would have ended this entire situation in a heartbeat. But he didn't. And there's a reason he didn't. A reason that Derek Hadley was about to learn in the worst possible way. As Hadley walked Wesley toward the back of the cruiser, the radio crackled. But this time it sounded different. The dispatcher's voice was tighter, more formal, like someone had just tapped her on the shoulder and handed her a script she wasn't expecting to read. Unit 14, be advised. We have a priority inquiry from a federal agency regarding a person matching the description of your current contact. Stand by for a direct patch. Hadley frowned. Federal agency? He looked at Bowen. Bowen looked at the wallet still lying on the ground, then back at Hadley. He opened his mouth. The radio cut in again. Unit 14, confirm identity of individual before proceeding. Repeat, confirm identity before transport. Something shifted in the air. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it. The certainty that had been sitting on Derek Hadley's shoulders all night, that unearned confidence, that casual authority, it cracked. Just a little. Just enough. And for the first time since this stop began, the dread didn't belong to Wesley Turner. It belonged to the man holding the cuffs. While Hadley guided Wesley toward the back seat of the cruiser, one hand on his shoulder, the other on top of his head, pressing him down like he'd done it 100 times before, Bowen walked back toward the wallet. It was still lying on the sidewalk, open, face up under the streetlight. Bowen crouched down, picked it up, and for a moment he didn't move. He just stared at what was inside. A gold badge, an ID card with a holographic seal, a photograph, Wesley Turner's face clean and professional, and 3 letters printed in bold navy blue across the top. FBI. Not a consultant, not a retired agent, not someone who used to work in law enforcement. A current, active special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Bowen's hands went still. His fingers tightened around the wallet. He stood up slowly, the way a person stands when they've just realized they're holding a live grenade. He turned toward Hadley and his voice came out thin, almost cracked. Derek, you need to stop right now. Hadley was mid-motion. His hand was on the back of Wesley's head, guiding him into the cruiser. What? He barked, not even looking. Bowen didn't answer with words. He just walked forward and held the wallet open. Badge out. The gold caught the cruiser's flashing lights. Red, blue, like it was pulsing. Hadley's eyes moved from the badge to Wesley's face. Wesley was already seated in the back of the cruiser, cuffed, still, looking up at Hadley with the same expression he'd had the entire night. Calm, patient, unbroken. Like a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment, not with anger, but with something closer to certainty. Hadley stepped back from the car door. His hand dropped from the frame. He didn't speak. The narrator doesn't need to tell you what was happening inside his head. His body told the whole story. A sharp inhale, an unconscious step backward. The kind of silence that only comes when a person realizes all at once that they have done something they cannot undo. Bowen was already on his radio, voice low, requesting a supervisor to the scene. His hands were shaking now too. And then, from the back seat of the cruiser, still cuffed, still pressed against that hard plastic bench, Wesley spoke. Quietly, almost conversationally. I told you to be careful with the jacket. The same line, the exact same words he'd said minutes earlier when Hadley was yanking at his blazer. But now those words meant something completely different. Before, they sounded like a man trying to protect his clothing. Now they sounded like a warning that had already come true. The air around that cruiser changed. You could feel the power shift. Not gradually, not in pieces, but all at once, like a trap door dropping open under Hadley's feet. The cuffs were still on Wesley's wrists, but the authority? That was gone. It had transferred, completely, silently, and there was no getting it back. 12 minutes later, a supervisor arrived. Sergeant Nora Swanson, 45 years old. Squared away, no nonsense. The kind of officer who could read a scene in 5 seconds flat. She stepped out of her vehicle, looked at the cruiser, looked at the wallet in Bowen's hand, looked at the two officers who suddenly couldn't make eye contact with anyone, and she asked one question. "Whose badge is that?" Bowen nodded toward the cruiser. Swanson's jaw tightened. She walked to the back door, opened it, and looked at Wesley. Her voice was steady, professional, but there was something underneath it, something that sounded a lot like dread. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Swanson. I'm going to remove those handcuffs right now. Are you injured?" Wesley shook his head. The cuffs came off. Swanson turned to Hadley. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Return to the station, immediately. Do not speak to anyone until I get there." Hadley opened his mouth, then closed it. He walked to his cruiser like a man walking to his own sentencing. Within the hour, a phone call came into the precinct. FBI Supervisory Special Agent Raymond Caldwell, Wesley's direct superior. His voice was described by the desk sergeant who answered the call as ice poured over gravel. He didn't yell, didn't threaten. He identified Wesley, confirmed his assignment, and said one sentence. Just one. "I want the body camera footage from both officers on my desk by morning. Every second of it." That sentence didn't sound like a request. It sounded like the first page of a very long and very painful investigation. And back at the station, in a break room with flickering fluorescent lights and a coffee machine nobody had cleaned in weeks, Derek Hadley sat alone. His sergeant had told him not to leave. His partner had been separated from him. His badge and his firearm were still on him, for now, but they felt heavier than they ever had before. He wasn't thinking about Wesley Turner's rights. He wasn't thinking about what he'd said on that sidewalk or how hard he'd shoved a man against a wall. He was thinking about his pension. And somewhere deep in his gut, he already knew that pension was slipping away. Let me tell you who Wesley Turner actually is. Not the version Derek Hadley saw, a black man in a blazer who didn't belong in a suburban neighborhood. Not the version Tamara Hollins saw, a stranger walking too slowly past her house. Not the version the 911 dispatcher logged, a tall black male, no threat observed. The real version, the full picture. Wesley Turner graduated magna cum laude from Howard University with a degree in criminal justice. He then earned his Juris Doctor from Georgetown Law, top 15% of his class. He passed the bar on his first attempt, and instead of walking into a six-figure firm, he walked into a field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That was 11 years ago. In those 11 years, Wesley rose to the rank of special agent within the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Not the division that handles bank fraud, not counterterrorism, not cybercrime. The Civil Rights Division, the unit specifically tasked with investigating police misconduct and excessive use of force against civilians. That is what Wesley Turner did for a living, every single day. He investigated cops who abused their power. He built cases against officers who violated the constitutional rights of the people they swore to protect. He had testified before congressional subcommittees. He had sat across the table from police chiefs and sheriffs and internal affairs officers in a dozen cities. He had put corrupt officers in federal prison. And on the night of this story, one of those officers slammed his face into a brick wall and called him a monkey. But here's where this story turns from painful into something else entirely. Something that made Derek Hadley's situation 1,000 times worse than he could have imagined. Wesley didn't move to Briarfield Heights because he liked the neighborhood. He didn't move there for the good schools or the quiet streets or the property values. Wesley moved to Briarfield Heights 3 months ago because the FBI sent him there. He was on assignment. An active, ongoing federal investigation. The Bureau had received a cluster of complaints, multiple reports filed independently over the span of 2 years, alleging a pattern of racially motivated stops, excessive force, and verbal abuse by officers in the local police department. The complaints came from black residents, Latino residents, a biracial college student, a black delivery driver. Different people, different incidents, same department, same pattern. The FBI opened a preliminary inquiry, and as part of that inquiry, they embedded an agent in the community to observe, document, and assess the situation from the inside. That agent was Wesley Turner. So when Wesley walked down Magnolia Drive that Tuesday evening, past the manicured lawns and the little security signs and the American flags, he wasn't just walking home from the store. He was living inside his own case. Every walk, every interaction, every polite nod to a neighbor who didn't nod back. It was all field work, all observation, all evidence. And Derek Hadley, the officer who was now sitting in a break room staring at a wall, hadn't just stopped the wrong person. He had become a case study, a data point, a living, breathing exhibit in the exact investigation that was targeting his department. If this story were fiction, you'd say the irony was too perfect, too neat. But the thing about real patterns, real systemic patterns, is that they don't need coincidence. They just need time. If an officer has a habit of targeting black men and you put a black man in his path, the habit does the rest. Wesley didn't have to do anything. He just had to exist in that space. The system exposed itself. Now, there's a question you've probably been asking since the cuffs went on, maybe even shouting it at your screen. Why didn't he just show the badge? It's the obvious move. The second Hadley started getting aggressive, Wesley could have said 5 words. "I'm a federal agent." And the whole thing would have stopped. Instantly. No shove, no wall, no cuffs. 5 words and it's over. So why didn't he? 3 reasons, and each one matters. First, revealing his identity during a stop would have compromised the broader investigation. If Hadley or anyone in the department learned the FBI had an agent embedded in the community, evidence could disappear. Witnesses could be pressured. The entire case, months of work, dozens of complaints, could unravel overnight. Wesley's silence wasn't passivity. It was operational security. Second, and this one cuts deeper, Wesley understood something that most people don't have to think about. If he flashed his badge to escape the situation, it would only protect him. The badge would save Wesley Turner, but it wouldn't save the next black man who walked down Magnolia Drive without a badge. It wouldn't change what Hadley believed or how he operated. It would just teach Hadley to check for credentials before he slammed someone into a wall. That's not justice. That's just a smarter version of the same abuse. Third, and this is the one that sat with me the longest, Wesley wanted to experience exactly what any other black resident of Briarfield Heights would experience during a stop by this department. Not as an agent, not as someone with power or protection, as a civilian. Because that experience, the shove, the language, the manufactured suspicion, the cuffs, that was the evidence. That was the data point. You can read 100 complaint files and still not know what it feels like to have your face pressed against a brick wall by a man who's already decided you're guilty. Wesley chose to know, and he chose to document it. Every word, every second, in real time, inside his own mind. That's not a man who lost control of the situation. That's a man who understood the situation better than anyone else on that street. Within 24 hours, the precinct was in full crisis mode. Police Chief Donald Marsh, 58, 30 years on the force, 18 months from retirement, was briefed in his office. The narrator doesn't need to dramatize his reaction. It was a long silence followed by a single word that can't be repeated here. Then he picked up his phone, called the city attorney, called the mayor's office, called his wife. When a local police officer puts his hands on a federal agent, the paperwork alone can end a career. But when that federal agent is actively investigating your department for the exact type of misconduct that just happened on camera, that's not paperwork. That's a reckoning. Hadley was placed on administrative leave within 18 hours. Badge collected. Firearm collected. He sat in the precinct parking lot in his personal truck for 45 minutes before he could bring himself to start the engine. His union rep had been called. His partner, Bowen, had already been pulled into a separate room for individual questioning. The blue wall, that invisible code that says you don't go against your own, was already cracking. And Wesley? Wesley went home that night. He made dinner. He called Raymond Caldwell, debriefed for 20 minutes on a secure line, and then sat on his front porch. the same porch he'd been walking toward when the whole thing started. He drank the only bottle of sparkling water that hadn't shattered on the sidewalk. He didn't celebrate. He didn't post anything. He didn't call a lawyer or a journalist or a friend. He sat down at his kitchen table and wrote a field report. 3 pages, single-spaced, every detail, every word Hadley said, every second of physical contact, every de-escalation opportunity that Hadley ignored. Timestamps accurate to the minute. That report, those 3 quiet, precise, devastating pages, would become the foundation of everything that came next. 2 investigations opened simultaneously, 2 separate tracks, 2 different sets of teeth. The first was an internal affairs inquiry, handled inside the department by Lieutenant Patricia Greer, 50 years old, 22 years on the force. Greer had a reputation that preceded her into every room she entered. She was meticulous, she was thorough, and she was immune to political pressure. Officers who'd been through her interview room described the experience the same way. She never raised her voice, never lost her temper, and never let you leave until she had exactly what she came for. She wasn't liked, she was respected. And in internal affairs, that distinction matters more than anything. The second investigation came from the outside. FBI Civil Rights Division, overseen by Supervisory Special Agent Raymond Caldwell, working in coordination with Regional Director Victoria Stokes. This wasn't a courtesy review. This wasn't an advisory memo. This was a federal probe into whether Officer Derek Hadley had deprived Wesley Turner of his constitutional rights under color of law. That's federal language for a very simple idea. Did a government agent use his badge to violate someone's basic human rights? 2 investigations, same incident, same evidence, but very different consequences. Greer started with the body camera footage. And this is where that small detail from earlier, the one about Hadley's camera being angled slightly off-center, paid off in the worst possible way for Hadley. His camera captured the audio clearly, every word, every command, every slur. But the video frame was tilted just enough to miss the critical moments. The initial shove against the wall was partially out of frame. The moment Wesley's face hit the brick, out of frame. The aggressive pat-down, half visible at best. If Hadley's camera had been the only footage, there would have been gaps, holes in the story, room for doubt. But Hadley's camera wasn't the only footage. Craig Bowen's body camera caught everything. Full frame, clear angle. From the moment the patrol car pulled up to the moment the cuffs clicked shut. The shove, the force of Wesley's body hitting the wall, the grocery bag falling, the sparkling water shattering. Hadley's hand on the back of Wesley's neck, the wallet tumbling out of the jacket. Every second. Greer watched both recordings side by side. She noted in her report that the discrepancy between the 2 cameras was consistent with either accidental misalignment or deliberate obstruction. She flagged Hadley's camera angle for further review. She didn't accuse. She didn't need to. The note was enough. It would sit in the file like a splinter. Small, but impossible to ignore. Then Greer began the interviews. First, Tamara Hollins, the woman who made the 911 call that started everything. Hollins came into the interview room nervous, defensive, arms crossed. She spoke quickly, too quickly, explaining that she was just being a good neighbor, that she cared about her community, that she'd lived on Magnolia Drive for over 20 years, and she had a right to know who was walking past her house. Greer let her talk. Didn't interrupt, didn't push back, just listened. And then she asked one question. Mrs. Hollins, you said the man was walking slowly and looking at the houses. If a white man had been doing the same thing at the same time of day, wearing the same clothes, would you have called 911? Silence. Not the kind of silence where someone is thinking about their answer. The kind of silence where someone already knows the answer and can't bring themselves to say it out loud. Hollins's eyes dropped to the table. Her voice cracked. I don't know. Maybe not. Greer didn't editorialize, didn't press further. She wrote the answer down and moved on. But that silence, that one honest, devastating pause, said more than 100 pages of testimony ever could. The call that started everything was built on nothing, on assumption, on a feeling, on the belief that a black man walking down a street was, by default, a threat. Next, Earl Jennings, the man who recorded the incident from his porch. Jennings was the opposite of Hollins. Calm, direct, almost matter-of-fact. He'd lived on Magnolia Drive for 31 years. He'd seen enough. He provided his phone footage and a written statement. He described the stop in detail, the cruiser pulling up, the conversation, the escalation. He described the shove, the sound of Wesley's body hitting the brick, the grocery bag falling, the bottle shattering. And then he said something that Greer wrote down word for word, something that cut through the entire investigation like a blade. That man didn't raise his voice once, not once, and they still put him against that wall. Greer underlined it, twice. Then came the interview that mattered most. Derek Hadley. Hadley walked into the interview room with his union representative beside him. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans, a gray polo shirt, sneakers. Without the uniform, he looked smaller, younger, less certain. But the moment Greer started asking questions, the defensiveness came back. The posture, the jaw, the rehearsed answers. He described Wesley as non-compliant, as evasive, as someone whose behavior was inconsistent with a cooperative individual. Greer listened, took notes. Then she pressed play on Bowen's body camera footage. The screen showed Wesley Turner standing perfectly still in the headlights of the cruiser, hands visible, voice calm, answering every question, narrating his own movements before reaching for his wallet. Greer paused the footage. Officer Hadley, you described the subject as non-compliant. Can you point to the moment in this footage where non-compliance occurs? Hadley shifted in his chair. It's not about one moment. It's the totality of... Can you point to a specific moment? Silence. Greer waited. She was very good at waiting. Hadley tried a different angle. It wasn't what he did, it was how he carried himself. Something was off about him. He was too calm, too polished for... He stopped, mid-sentence. The word he didn't say filled the room like smoke. Greer leaned forward slightly. Too polished for what, Officer Hadley? He didn't finish the sentence. His union rep put a hand on his arm. The interview continued, but the damage was done. Hadley couldn't justify the stop, couldn't justify the search, couldn't justify the force. And in trying, he'd exposed the only real reason behind all of it, a reason he couldn't say out loud because saying it would end his career even faster than it was already ending. Too polished for a black man in that neighborhood. That's what he meant. Everyone in that room knew it. Craig Bowen's interview was a different kind of painful. He wasn't aggressive, he wasn't defensive, he was scared, sweating through his shirt, speaking in half-sentences and fragments. He looked like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for days and had finally been told to set it down. He admitted he saw the badge when the wallet fell. He admitted he tried to tell Hadley. He admitted, and this is the part that stuck, that he didn't try hard enough. Greer asked him directly, "Why didn't you physically intervene when you saw your partner use force against a compliant individual?" Bowen stared at the table. "He's my partner. You don't go against your partner on a stop. That's not how it works." "Even when your partner is assaulting a federal agent?" Bowen closed his eyes. I know. Bowen wasn't a monster. He wasn't cruel. He was something almost worse. He was passive. He watched it happen. He saw the badge, he knew, and he still didn't step in front of his partner and say, "Stop," because the culture told him not to. The code told him not to. The blue wall, that invisible agreement that says loyalty to your partner comes before everything else, told him to stay quiet. And he listened. The system doesn't just produce Hadleys, it produces Bowens, by the hundreds. Meanwhile, the FBI layer of the investigation added weight that the local inquiry couldn't match. Raymond Caldwell shared Wesley's 3-page field report with Patricia Greer's team. Greer read it in her office with the door closed. When she finished, she set it down and said to her assistant, This is the most thorough incident report I've ever received from a complainant. Caldwell on the phone corrected her gently. He's not a complainant, Lieutenant. He's an investigator. He was documenting it in real time, while it was happening to him. That distinction mattered. Wesley's report wasn't written from memory the next morning. It wasn't reconstructed from emotion or adrenaline. It was assembled in the moment, mentally cataloged, beat by beat, while his face was against a wall. Timestamps, direct quotes, physical descriptions of force applied, assessment of de-escalation opportunities ignored. It read less like a victim statement and more like a surveillance transcript. And then the broader investigation delivered its final blow. The FBI's pattern inquiry, the one Wesley had been assigned to before any of this happened, produced 3 years of data on the department. Officer Derek Hadley had been involved in 14 use-of-force incidents in that period. 14. 11 of them involved Black or Latino individuals. 3 had generated formal complaints, and all 3 had been dismissed internally, quietly, without external review, without consequence. One complainant, a Black college student pulled over for a broken taillight, described being told by Hadley to go back where you came from. The student filed a complaint. It was reviewed by Hadley's supervisor. It was closed within 2 weeks. No action taken. The pattern wasn't hidden. It was just ignored. Over and over and over again. Until someone with the authority to do something about it walked right into the middle of it. And then, the moment the entire story had been building toward. Not planned, not staged, just 2 men in a hallway at the wrong time. Wesley was at the precinct for a scheduled interview with the FBI team. Hadley was there for a follow-up with internal affairs. They were on different floors, different schedules, but the building only had one stairwell. Hadley came around the corner first. Civilian clothes, no badge, no gun, just a man in jeans who used to be an officer. Wesley came from the other direction. Suit, tie, FBI credentials hanging from a lanyard around his neck. Visible, unmistakable. They stopped, 3 feet apart. Neither spoke for a full beat. Then Wesley said, evenly, without malice, without triumph, without raising his voice even slightly, "You said something was off about me. You were right. I was paying attention." He walked past, didn't look back. Hadley stood in that hallway alone, frozen, staring at the wall like it had just spoken to him. 3 weeks later, Patricia Greer filed her report. 38 pages. It recommended termination of Officer Derek Hadley on 4 grounds: excessive force, racial profiling, failure to de-escalate, and filing a misleading incident report. It recommended a formal reprimand and mandatory retraining for Officer Craig Bowen for failure to intervene. And it recommended a department-wide review of use-of-force protocols, bias training, and supervisory oversight. The final line of the report read like a verdict. The conduct observed in this incident was not an anomaly. It was consistent with a pattern of behavior that this department failed to identify, address, or correct over a period of multiple years. The system had finally named itself as the problem. It took a federal badge on the pavement to make it happen, but the words were on the page, in ink, 38 pages of them. Police Chief Donald Marsh had 2 options: fire Hadley and face the union, the media, the scrutiny, or negotiate a quiet resignation and hope it all blew over. 6 months ago, option 2 might have worked, but not with the FBI sitting across the street holding 3 years of pattern data and a field report that read like a prosecution brief. Raymond Caldwell never said it directly. He didn't need to. The message was clear. Handle it, or we will. Marsh chose option 1. Derek Hadley was formally terminated on a Thursday morning. A meeting, a letter, a signature, a door that closed behind him. His union filed a grievance the same afternoon. It would be denied 8 months later. Hadley walked to his truck in the parking lot and sat behind the wheel for a long time. He'd spent 5 years telling people who they were. Now someone had told him. Craig Bowen received a formal reprimand. 80 hours of mandatory de-escalation training. Reassignment to a different unit. He wasn't the one who shoved Wesley into a wall, but he was the one who stood 3 feet away and let it happen. In policing, silence isn't neutral. Silence is a choice. 6 months later, Bowen requested a transfer to another county. He's still carrying a badge. Whether he carries the memory of that Tuesday night is something only he knows. The FBI's civil rights probe concluded that Hadley's actions met the threshold for a federal violation under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. The case was referred to the U.S. Attorney's Office. A referral doesn't always end in a courtroom, but it always ends a career. The department implemented 3 reforms. Mandatory bias awareness training, 40 hours annually. Revised use of force reporting with supervisory review within 24 hours. And a civilian oversight board with subpoena power. Residents, not officers, sitting at a table with the authority to demand answers. Reforms on paper don't always become reforms in practice. But the paper is the first step, and this department didn't take that step voluntarily. It took it because Wesley Turner stood still while someone tried to break him. And weeks later, on a quiet evening, Wesley walked down Magnolia Drive. Same blazer, same route, same time of day. This time nobody called. No cruiser pulled up behind him. Just a man walking home, the way it should have been from the beginning. Wesley Turner's story didn't happen in a vacuum. In the year before this incident, the Department of Justice opened investigations into 12 police departments across the country for pattern or practice violations. 12 departments, 12 cities, 12 sets of complaints that had been filed, ignored, filed again, and ignored again, until someone with enough authority and enough patience forced the door open. Wesley's case became one of them, one story among many, but also one story that made the pattern impossible to deny. Because here's the thing this story forces you to sit with. Wesley Turner got justice. Real justice. Documented, procedural, consequence-driven justice. Hadley was fired. The department was reformed. The FBI's investigation moved forward. The system worked. But the system worked because of who Wesley was. His badge was his shield. Literally. His law degree was his armor. His 11 years of federal service were the reason phones rang, supervisors showed up, and 38-page reports got written. The moment that wallet hit the pavement and that gold badge caught the light, everything changed. Instantly. So the question this story leaves behind isn't about Wesley. It's about the man who walks down Magnolia Drive next Tuesday. The one without a badge, without a law degree, without 11 years of federal authority backing him up. The one who gets shoved into the same wall, hears the same words, feels the same cuffs, and has nothing in his wallet but a driver's license and a debit card. What happens to him? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer, but it has pieces of an answer. Small ones, real ones, happening in real time. The Civilian Oversight Board in Wesley's district is being studied by 3 neighboring jurisdictions as a model. Earl Jennings, the man who pressed record on his porch that night, started attending city council meetings for the first time in his 62 years. Tamara Hollins, the woman who made the 911 call that started all of this, volunteered for a community bridge building program the following spring. She never said publicly what changed her mind. She didn't need to. The fact that she showed up said enough. Change doesn't always start with a march. Sometimes it starts with a man on a porch pressing record. Sometimes it starts with a woman admitting, even if only to herself, that she was wrong. One last thing. After everything was over, the investigation, the termination, the reforms, a colleague asked Wesley why he didn't just show the badge during the stop. Why he stood there and took it when 5 words could have made it stop. Wesley's answer was short, and it's the last thing you'll hear in this story. The badge isn't supposed to be the reason they treat you like a human being. Here's what I want to know from you, and I mean this. If Wesley Turner didn't have that FBI badge in his wallet, if he was just a regular man walking home with a bag of groceries, do you think this story ends the same way? Drop your answer in the comments. Because I think what you say and what you don't say tells us everything about where we are right now. If this story made you feel something, share it. Not for the algorithm, for the conversation. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Drop a like if you believe accountability should not depend on what's in someone's wallet. And leave a comment, because your voice is part of this too.
Hartley was fired. The department was reformed. The system worked, but only because of what was in Wesley's wallet. Wesley could have ended it in 5 seconds, flash the badge, say the words, walk away, but he didn't. Because who does that save? Just him. It doesn't change Hartley. It doesn't protect the next guy walking down the street with nothing but a grocery bag. It just teaches a bad cop to check credentials first. That's not accountability. That's just a workaround. So Wesley took the shove, took the cups, and in his head, while his face was against the wall, he was documenting everything, every word, every second, building the case in real time. When someone asked him later why he didn't just show the badge, he said, "The badge isn't supposed to be the reason they treat you like a human being." Yeah, let that one land. So here's my question, and I need you to sit it with. If Wesley was just a regular man that night, does anything change? Does anyone show up? Does a single phone ring? You already know. Drop your answer in the comments. If this hit you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Your voice matters here. Use it.